Discussions in this show are for entertainment and educational purposes only and should not be construed as specific recommendations or investment advice. Always consult with your investment professional before making important investment decisions. Securities offered through registered representatives of Cambridge Investment Research Incorporated, a broker-dealer, member FINRA, SIPC. Advisory services through Cambridge Investment Research Advisors Incorporated, a registered investment advisor. Cambridge and SmartPro Financial are not affiliated.
Hey, welcome everyone to the SmartPro podcast. We're so excited. We are joined by Brad Powell of NorthRidge Church. We are so excited to have you because you have so much experience leading a large organization at NorthRidge. You're the lead pastor at the church for over 34 years. And we know you have a lot of wisdom in building an organization that lasts, a culture that lasts and is meaningful. And we know we have a lot of listeners that we feel like could be just have a huge amount of impact from your story on their lives, on their business, on the culture that they're building inside of their organizations. So thank you so much for your time and being here.
It's my privilege. Great to be here. And we'll see if it's wisdom that I get to share. Thanks for that introduction, though. I always hope the product equals the hype, you know?
Well, could you tell our listeners a little bit about your story, the story of NorthRidge, and what you guys have done in Michigan?
Sure. My story, I was raised in an attorney's home. My dad was a very successful attorney, had his own law practice, and we were a religious family without any really knowledge of faith in Jesus. And my dad came from poverty, and so he was the very first kid. I mean, he had TB when he was a kid and was put away in a TB home for a year. He had polio when he was a kid and he was put away for a year. His dad was an alcoholic. It was impoverished. They lived in a dugout hole that was intended to be the basement of a house that his dad never finished, and literally impoverished. And my dad put himself through high school, put himself through college, put himself through a master's program in business, and then went through law school. And he achieved every goal he could have imagined achieving. And then he realized he was still as empty as he was before. And he started a spiritual search of his own. So when I was about 10 years old, he came to faith and started yanking me to church. I went to church and rejected the whole thing myself. I'm a mess redeemed by grace, because I got kicked out of 4 schools. I mean, I was a mess.
Wow.
Until Jesus literally transformed me. It wasn't religion, it was a relationship. Everything changed from there. And it was such a dramatic, I'll synthesize, it was such a dramatic life impact for me, inside out, that I decided that the greatest thing that I could do with my life is to share this power for transformation to other people. And God's called me into ministry. And then it turns out churches are people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you really have a passion to help people find the transformation of Jesus, you can't let them be trapped in a formula of religion. You have to introduce and lead out transformative realities as you follow Jesus organizationally. 34 years ago, after being a senior pastor 6 years prior to that in 3 different churches, I was praying, God, I'd love to be in one place for a really long time with a lifelong set of challenges. God laughed and said, I can do that. Called me to this ministry. And it was a church that had been in decline. It had been a legacy church and had been one of the largest churches in America, which was at that time about 2,000 or 3,000. But then for 30 plus years, it was in decline.
Okay.
And God called me in as a 32-year-old pastor to a church that had an average age just under 60 years old. They had lost 2 of their generations because they weren't doing anything right. And he called me to lead them to experience once again the transformative power of God, to the idea that Jesus is the one to build the church and not their traditions or strategies. And after about 7 years of agony, it started happening. I picture it as the wave, you know. I was up there yelling, yeah, no one was following me, yeah. And then finally a couple people here and a couple people there, and then all of a sudden the whole wave was going on, and man, nothing like momentum. And we started making a difference. So when I went there, the church was quite a bit less than 1,000. And then we got to see it grow to be a church of about 20,000. And it's a pretty amazing environment. And it's not always easy, and you have to keep transforming. But that's kind of my story. An attorney son who came to faith, and then my faith transformation so dramatic, I wanted to serve him.
Wow, that's amazing. What a just that growth trajectory and what you've done, and starting with your father in that environment, to where he was able to grow out of that and really accomplish so much, and then with you, and his introduction and walk, and then with you, into what you guys have done at NorthRidge and what has been done at NorthRidge. My question from what you just laid out there is, in that 7 years of time where you're going, okay, here's the vision. I'm 32. I'm young, and the church, there's a different generation. There's this giant age gap, a doubling. What sustained you in that 7 years to know this is the direction and this is going to be the way we go? Were there little wins along the way? Was there just this time of just faith that it would work out? What sustained you?
And by the way, it's a really good question. And the truth is, in the first 3 or 4 years, there were absolutely no wins. And so wouldn't it be nice? I've had lots of wins since, and wins can inspire you to the next day, to the next step, to the next challenge. I didn't have any. So your question resounds with power in my life. I think this is why, to answer your question, God gave me such a dramatic calling into this church. Just so people know, I've never seen a handwriting on the wall, Brad, do this. He never sent a Goodyear blimp by. He's never talked out loud to me. But there have been a couple of moments in my life that it was so clearly the work of God that I knew, and there was nothing that could take that away from me. And getting called to NorthRidge was such an event. It was impossible. The church had a profile for their pastor. He had to be over 50. He had to have built a church of 1,000 plus. He had to, have all kinds of things. I matched none of them. Yeah. I mean, none of them. And yet God broke down all those barriers and did something to bring me in. In fact, there was a guy who had been called to be their pastor, 98% vote, and he rejected them. They were so dejected as a church that they were even willing to call me to be their pastor. That's how God worked it. And that drama is what I leaned on for the first 4 years. And I have to tell you, I really had to do it. It was hell on earth, to be honest with you. It was dramatic. I had 2 guys on my staff. One had been on staff 11 years longer than I'd been alive, and another had been on staff 9 years longer than I'd been alive. And they didn't agree with any of my points of leadership. It was drama. So God had to part the Red Sea for us. And I had to just believe. I just had to believe he had called me in that environment. And I pray through all the time, where God guides, he provides. And I just believed he was providing me the wisdom. He'd provide me the strength. And you'll find this is funny, I think. When we were at the worst moment in the transition, I got a call from San Diego, California, a storied church that was on the up. Everything was great. You go there, you get an instant name and invitations to preach anywhere in the country. And they asked me to consider being their pastor.
Okay.
And I'm in the midst of agony in Detroit, Michigan, I might add, where it's winter 9 months out of the year. Not quite, but you get the idea. And San Diego's calling, and it's storied. And I didn't even have to blink an eye. I said, absolutely not. It would be criminal if I left this church in the middle of the transition, because that ruins everything. People would say, God's not in this. That I would have killed the church. The only bad part of that story is when I went home and told my wife that we could go to San Diego, and I said no. She didn't like that so much. But that's not even true. She was all in on this thing. So the call of God is what I leaned on, honestly. And that got me to where I could then have little wins that I could lean on. But if I could say this to leaders, if you're only moving forward based upon the inspiration of the moment, you're never going to lead well for the long haul. You have to have something more concrete as your foundation.
Yeah.
You have to know that this is what you should be doing, you want to be doing, and it's going to make a big difference and provide meaning in your life. And you can go through anything if that's the case. And so that's what I leaned on.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's something worth going back and listening to what you just said again there, because that inspiration in the moment, like that's just not enough. It's
It's not.
that excitement that people go, oh, I'm so excited about this, the momentum right here. And then the hard times come, which we know they're going to come, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, well, and they just struggle with adversity, because there's
They
not that
That's right.
bigger thing that's pushing them or moving them, that mission. It's like you have to be on a mission of something bigger.
Yeah, and
But
it
I
goes
think that's,
beyond business, doesn't it, Rick? It's like,
yep.
think about this. A lot of people are inspired to say I do and get married, but that inspiration of that moment doesn't last, and then it just all falls apart. They do it in, narratives they're writing in their personal stories. They do it in their businesses. If we don't have a foundation to character that drives us in each of these things that's bigger than inspiration, we'll fail. So, yeah.
So doing this, you guys have transformed from this church that, was searching, and for a lead pastor that was in decline. You're not the first choice. You're in here and really because something bigger than what you could control or what they could control. And you're
That's right.
in this environment as a young man, leading the organization, leading the church. It sounds like, some of the leadership there wasn't even really happy about it, or is at odds with what you wanted to do, which means that you had a vision of what needed to be done as a leader, but you were immediately hit with adversity from the people that you would have hoped could have been supportive. Who did you lean on during that time of here's the vision, here's what I want to do, but even the people around me, if you're a business leader, you might go, hey, even my key people that are next to me aren't really with me on this. How do I convince them, or how do I find the people in my life, whether that's a mentor, whether that's, a friend or somebody in business, to walk alongside so that you had that help to sustain you? Did you have somebody like that when you're starting?
Yeah. The answer is yes. And first of all, my wife, Roxanne, is the partner of a lifetime. And she was always a supportive, foundational strength in my life. And so I had that. But this is where I can counsel spouses to be careful. I couldn't take all of the garbage that I was experiencing in my leadership and dump it to her in our home all the time. Number one, it would have created a very negative environment there. We would have been grieving too much. And number two, it would have, because she's going to be supportive of me and defensive of me, it would have turned her to angry responses and a disdain towards the environment of the church we were in. And so, though she was always a strength and support, I couldn't share all the cancer with her. God did give me, in this very old church, 2 young staff members who were out of sorts with that place before I came. We started leaning on each other a lot, and they were people I could share with, and that was helpful. I had to look outside the church for leadership ideas that were beyond anything I had experienced. And I didn't have personal relationships with people, but I could read their books and I could listen to their they didn't have podcasts back then, but to their cassette tape,
Yeah.
recordings of their leadership things. And I had to want it enough to go work to get mentored by people I had no open door with. And I did that, and a couple of people to share with on the inside. And then the truth is, through my leadership, I had to ultimately bring in people and create people and disciple people to the place where they could be that in my life. So it's almost like, it's like Moses. I'm no Moses, but Moses was all alone. Then he got Aaron.
Mm-hmm.
And then he had to slowly win over people within the community. And by the end, he was this storied leader, and
Yeah.
yeah, I had to build my own in a sense, but that was okay because I had Jesus calling so obvious in my life that I knew he was involved in this.
Yeah.
And he said, I will build my church and the gates of hell, which I was experiencing, won't overcome it. And
Yeah.
so, yeah.
Let me go back for a second when you talked about your relationship with your spouse, and hey, I can't take all of this negativity, from what I'm experiencing. And as people in business, we tend to do this as leaders. I think this is a problem in leadership where a lot of the burden is shouldered by the individual. And then the one person they feel like maybe they can talk to or bring it up to or be more vulnerable with is their spouse. But we know from what you just explained, like that can be an overwhelming experience for them too. Like you're shifting this burden onto them as well. And I guess the question, the thing that I think about is a lot of times leaders are worried to talk to somebody, to have any, people in their lives, because they don't want, I don't know if it's to have their leadership questioned. It's more so just if I show there's weakness at times when you have an organization or a business, people could use that against you, could prey on it, or you feel like, no, if I'm a leader, I shouldn't have these worries. If I have this vision, it doesn't matter. I'll power through it. How important do you think it is for a leader in a church and business and a family to have somebody to talk to, have relationships? Because we see statistically people are more isolated now than ever and more lonely than ever. There's an epidemic of loneliness in the United States, probably in most of the Western world. And people have access to communication, but it's not really as authentic as it had been.
That's exactly
And
right.
how important do you feel like it is for people in leadership to have somebody they can lean on and talk to through these things? So you're not just holding it all in, and you're not maybe even going the next step and saying, hey, I'm holding it in personally, but then I'm bringing it home, and now it's both of our joint struggles with a husband and wife.
Yeah, yeah. I can't stress enough that you don't want to vomit all the negative crap into your home. It destroys everything. I've seen it happen in every genre of leadership.
Mm-hmm.
So, but to answer your question, I think it's vital. I think it's absolutely vital that we have at least one, if not a couple people we can download stuff on
Mm-hmm.
and ideate around that stuff with. But it's not easy. And I'll be honest, number one, I wasn't great at it. So I knew the loneliness of leadership. And there's going to be a loneliness that you can't cure. In the end, someone has to make the decisions, be accountable, fight the dragon.
Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't as motivated as a young guy to pursue that as I ought to have been. And so I was lonely. And that's not the best place to be. I had a lot of darkness that I walked through, a lot of valleys I was in that I didn't have to be in if I had invited other people in. That's the first thing. The second thing is a lot of people are afraid to include people into their world and be authentic about what they're experiencing. You said it, you declare weaknesses because, you don't let them see you sweat and all that different stuff. And I have found the absolute opposite. And then I'm going to give a caveat of caution, but the absolute opposite is I have created more influence over people's lives in my leadership by being honest about my weaknesses than I ever have by hiding them.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're honest about your weaknesses, they go, oh, this is a person I can relate to. And yet look what's happening in their life. Look what they are. And so they listen. And this, as a pastor, I declare my brokenness, my flaws, my weaknesses. And that's what gets people gravitating to listen to the conversation I want to have with them. So, but this is the caveat of caution. when you're talking about sharing details of your leadership, organization, personages that are involved in that, you need to be really careful and wise as to who you trust. Make sure, just like in getting married, so many people are like, oh, I love her, I love him, and they get married, and it's like, I don't even like these people. You have to create at least a knowledge of probability of success,
Mhm.
that this person is trustworthy. They have a history of faithfulness. These aren't people that are looking to get an edge or an agenda on you. They're not in competition. They're
Yep.
really there to support you. So you have to be careful with that. But you should do a better job than I did at finding that. And because I just think it makes us stronger. It makes us better. The Bible says it clearly, two's better than one.
Yep.
There's strength in that. And so I think it's very important, but be careful.
Do you feel like in leadership, when you have somebody that does have their own agenda or has an agenda that is um, in competition with yours, or uses that information, like you just explained, in a way, and almost weaponizes in a way to maybe harm the bigger picture, is the way to deal with that just to remove them from the organization, to invite them to work somewhere else, be somewhere else? Because I think that can be hard at times, where you want to show love and compassion, and maybe I can fix this situation. Maybe that's not the right thing. Maybe it is.
Yeah,
Do you?
but you have to. It's a very important question, and I'm going to answer it first on the front side with a definite yes. In the end, it really does demand removing them from that place where they can be a cancer growing, they can be a hindrance to going forward, and those things. However, so yes, that is the end game. I don't think that's the starting place. I have found that a lot of times the difficulties that I have with certain staff people are owed to my lack as a leader. For example, maybe I hired them for a job that they were clearly not gifted for, competent for, called to. And so now I've got them struggling against what's real. Sometimes it's that I just haven't communicated with clarity about the expectations of that job and where they're at. And so they start getting frustrated with the lack of communication. And so sometimes it comes from the leader. I always have to ask the question, is this my fault?
Mhm.
Have I neglected what I need? Have I missed things? And then the second thing is then when you discover that, if it's my fault, I bring them in and say, I've blown it with you and I'm really sorry. And so let's start from square one. Here's the clarity. And we come up with a process for doing that. Or if I determine it's their fault, I'm going to say, hey, this is your issue. And I just don't think you have the competencies or the chemistry to fit this place, and yada, yada. And so, what do you think? And have that discussion. And once that's identified, then you can set up touch points.
Sure.
Yes, my view has been proven true, or you've proven me wrong. But in the end, the third point is they have to be removed. But removing isn't a negative. Removing is a gift of love. I'll give you one example. I had a guy on my team, a great guy, 10 years older than me, loved the church, had a great heart, but his skill sets were way beneath what was required for a role in a church that was becoming a megachurch. He was a small church pastor that was way over his head in this environment.
Okay.
And he was struggling, and he was going to keep struggling, but he loved me and he loved this place and he was loyal to me. And I finally came and said, I love you too much to do this to you. So I'm going to help you to find a place where you can thrive, instead of to protect myself and for me to be in my comfort zone and for everyone to love me and thinking about me, keep you here, which is worse for you. So sometimes we have to love people enough to do what they will hate and will cause people to hate us, but we're not protecting us. We're doing the best for the organization, the best for the, calling we have, and the best thing for that person. And by the way, that guy got it, and he's always cared about me. Everyone in his life, including his wife, has hated me ever since. But I didn't do it as a punishment. I did it as a benefit. And he became a very successful small church pastor. He did great. But you have to do it for the right motivations. And the right motivations is to be a good steward of the organization you've been called to lead, and for love of people. And one last one, a lot of times leaders refuse to fire people because it's going to hurt them, their image, people loving them. It's going to make their lives very uncomfortable. So who are they making leadership decisions about? Themselves and their own comfort.
Wow.
That's not leadership, that's followership. And they declare they love people, but they're not. They love themselves so much that they're going to keep someone who's hurting the goodwill of the entire community, including that person, to just keep themselves comfortable. And so if we really love, we'll make the tough decisions to do the right thing for those people in the organization. It's not easy, though.
No. And, I think that rolls right into building a culture, and a culture that lasts, that can grow and thrive through hard times. We know that whether it's a church or a large organization, whether it's a business, like really anything, there's going to be times that are going to be harder that are going to come along, and so you've kind of talked about this foundation that you guys have laid. You've talked about growing and changing the identity and the culture of, the church, and this transformational change that has allowed you guys to grow it into such an impactful place. But how did you grow? Maybe not even grow is the right word. How did you maintain this culture that allows that to happen?
Yeah. By the way, it's the question of leadership, because the truth is there is no such thing as leadership that is not, in its ultimate vision and goal, pursuing change. Management produces constancy. The entire goal of management is to create constancy. In other words, we've got an organization, and we've got strategies, and we've got processes that are highly effective right now, working tremendously. And so what management tries to do is create constancy around those principles for great effectiveness. But leadership is about saying, no, we need to take this step forward into the unknown, this step into the future, so we can be more effective, which is part of what you're talking about: culture building, mission building, moving towards the preferred objective, vision, et cetera. And so I think the church, and this is true of businesses, because I know a lot of you out there are business leaders, small business leaders. This is true in homes and what's going on. This is true in churches. This is true in every environment, that we are overloaded with management. We are trying to maintain the status quo with constancy, which, as the world changes, and it's changing faster and faster and faster, it means we're becoming more and more irrelevant every second, less and less effective every second. So it does take, leadership is about moving something towards change. And whoever you are, whatever you're doing, I'm telling you, the world's changing around you. And if you're not leading, you have to have managers. But if you're not leading, you're failing. So how did we do it? I laid out some principles, and these are in the book I wrote, which is really about change your church for good, but it can apply to any organization, any life. It's like, the first thing it takes is the right leader. And by the right leader, I have these things I call the 5 C's. Everything's for a letter of purpose, for memory. And the right leader demands, that you genuinely have a calling to that position. You're not consuming. A lot of people want leadership positions so they can consume. They can consume the benefits. They can consume the organization's privilege. They can consume the all that. That's a thief. That's not a leader. So the right leader demands a true calling to invest in that environment. It demands character. I would rather, and I try to, I haven't always been perfect at this, because I'm heavily drawn and attracted to talent, but I would really prefer hiring strong character over strong competency. Because competency, within reason. Some people don't have gifts that can't be done, but competency can be trained. Character can't. And so calling is the right leader. Character is the right leader. If I had been the wrong leader, if I was consuming from the church that I've now pastored 34 years, when it was at its worst and I was invited to that church in San Diego, which was at its best, it would have served my purposes immensely. That would have proven that I had the character to take, not the character to give, that I was trying to consume and climb a ladder instead of invest, because I would have left that church in devastation. So character is important. Competency then is really vital. It's my third C. It's like they have to have the talent appropriate for the position and the vision for that position, because you're hiring for the moment, but you're not hiring to stay in that moment. So do they have the competency to take it to the next level in that particular thing and go with you? And so it's really, really big. And I fail on that. It's really hard. People can out-talk their abilities. And so you have to be careful in hearing. In fact, here's one of my weaknesses, Rick. I was a horrible interviewer because I would share my passion, and all they had to do is reflect their passion, my passion, back to me. And I fell in love with them because I was falling in love with me.
Sure.
It was horrible. So you have to be careful about that. Make sure that they don't overspeak their true competencies, and that takes some research. And then my fourth one is chemistry. You can have a person that has a strong sense of calling, has a strong character, has strong competencies, but they don't fit your culture or where you're wanting your culture to move to. And so chemistry is huge.
Yeah.
It's a huge issue if they don't fit. And then my last one is craving. They have to have a hunger. And this is a thing that's easy to lose. I mean, as the pastor now for 34 years, if there weren't new challenges I was facing, new visions I wasn't pursuing, it'd just be a bore, because I'm not a manager at heart, you know? And so you have to know what's going to keep you hungry, and you have to make sure you're giving your staff a chance to stay hungry. And there are some people who just don't want to be hungry anymore. It's too much work.
Yeah.
That's not who's going to help you build an organization. So those things help you to create the culture, to create the change, create the movement. Because remember, organizations are people. So the culture is going to develop out of people, and the leader is the first one. It takes the right leader. Do I reflect the right culture? Then you have to invest in building and bringing on other leaders and building on teams. One person can't do it forever, you know, and so I created wakes and let other people, you know, surf my wakes for too long. You need wake creators, not wake riders. And so you have to invest in other people to become leaders, and you need to invest in building teams. And then that will create the culture, and that will also sustain the culture, because those were your two questions. And the last thing I'll just say is the leader has to see the change that needs to be made 10 steps before it needs to be made. It's like the chess player, right? How many moves ahead can you see? And that was always my work, to try and see, where's the world going? How can we best then move this organization to achieve our mission? Our mission didn't change, our values didn't change, but our strategy had to. And that's where many organizations get in trouble. They invert their values. They start out with a missional value and values that drive them. In my view, in the church, it's God's mission and values for his church. They start with that, and then they establish man-made strategies that work in that moment of time. But over time, what happens is the man-made strategies, they become traditions and rituals and formulas. The man-made strategies become the value of the organization, and the mission is the lesser. That's why you can see churches, as an example, failing on their mission, but they think they're honoring God because they're keeping their traditions. The only problem is those are temporary man-made values and not God-given eternal values. So the leader has to be the one to see that. And when the leader stops seeing that, the organization's going to flip and invert, and it's going to fail.
Yeah. You know, I heard a quote once, and I don't know who to credit it to, but it was talking about organizations and companies and they kind of, especially ones that have success, where they have this growth, and then they have this window of success, and maybe it's a 10-year window of success where things are great. And then they don't do what you just talked about. They don't have a leader that's looking into the future, that's seeing where are things going? How do we change? And that 10 years kind of comes to a close, and the business doesn't close. They just spend the rest of their time defending the 10 years of success.
That's
They go
exactly
back
right.
and point to what we did, who we were, and it's not where we're going.
No,
And organizations fail when they do that.
they do. And by the way, if you look at corporate America, very often the people getting these huge salaries in these corporations and these, these big buyouts and all that different stuff are people who have ridden for a decade success that they had 2 decades before.
Yeah.
They're not good leaders now.
Mm-mm.
They're actually now just robbing the institution. It happens in churches all the time. I'm just telling you, and it's been a temptation for me, because it's easy when you become really ultra successful.
Yeah.
In human terms, organizational terms, it takes a lot of work. And then it's like, man, I'm going to ride this big momentum. Surfing's a lot more fun than wave making.
Yeah.
And, but you have to answer the question. This goes to the character again. It's like, am I really here to take? I don't think so. Did God grant us this success so that I could live comfortably? I don't think so. So you're dead on right. They're riding it. And the only way you can do it is through self-discipline. No one can make you do this. And you have to be honest with the data too. Look, I've had the ups and downs. We were really successful for like that 10-year, because you're really talking about almost the death cycle of an organization, the birth, life, decline, death in 10, 15 years. And I wrote it just up and up. And then all of a sudden there was a plateau and a little decline. The momentum, we were big. So, everything was going great, it looked like, but I knew we were in Plateausville. Yeah. And that's when you have to realize, okay, time to get uncomfortable again. And you know what really did it to me? COVID, man. Yeah. Because COVID was, I have a lot of experience as a pastor. I had no experience that was relevant to what happened when the world shut down.
That's right.
It was crazy. So I had to do the hard work again to grow and learn. Either I had to say I'm done, or I had to say, what's it going to take to get beyond this now? Mm-hmm. And it's been the hardest, 3-4 years of my ministry since the early days, if I'm honest. Because when you have big momentum and you have big influence as a leader, you can see ahead. I could communicate my new vision and where we were going to go, or cancel this thing and take this thing out. And I had the influence to do it. Yeah. But COVID's where I got stuck. I had no clue. And so I had to go, I have to dig deep to figure this thing out. And the good news is I failed a lot, took a lot of time, still don't have it totally figured out. But we are growing faster right now than we had for the 10, 15 years prior to COVID. We are growing younger. I'm not the youngest guy on the planet. And yet the average age, about 40 to 50% of the people attending our church now are between the ages of 18 and 35. We are reaching young people. We're ethnically diverse, experientially diverse, educationally diverse. It's just, we're on this grow again. But why? Because we faced down a crisis. We tried to do the hard work of seeing ahead. How do we apply the mission in this new environment? And we just started doing it. And what I realized, I had to go back and relay the foundation. Yeah. Many businesses don't do that. I'm a creative leader, so I always like to do new stuff. The only problem is, if new stuff moves you past the fundamentals, you're going to be a lousy football coach. You're going to be a lousy leader. You're going to be lousy at everything.
Discussions in this show are for entertainment and educational purposes only and should not be construed as specific recommendations or investment advice. Always consult with your investment professional before making important investment decisions. Securities offered through registered representatives of Cambridge Investment Research Incorporated, a broker-dealer, member FINRA SIPC. Advisory services through Cambridge Investment Research Advisors Incorporated, a registered investment advisor. Cambridge and SmartPro Financial are not affiliated.
Now, I think there's so much there. I was thinking about when you were talking with momentum and having a large organization, and where you can kind of lay back about how, I think at times when an organization is growing well, you can almost hide in it. You can Also, the outside might not see, and even a leadership team at times might not see, hey, we have to make changes because, like you mentioned, hey, we're a big organization, big church, but we saw this decline, but most people probably didn't see it. So then you're going, okay, how do we overcome this? How do we change? How do we make sure that we stop this decline, whether it's in attendance or whatever it may be? And other people go, what are you talking about? There's no
Yeah,
decline. You're like, no,
that's
there is, because you can almost hide in the organization when they get so big. And I think a lot of large companies in the United States, the ultra large companies struggle with that, where they can't make change, they can't adapt because they're so big, and I find that to be interesting when you lose that nimbleness as of an organization and the way to identify something quickly to make a change or react to it. That can be really difficult. And one of the things that I loved is when you went through those 3 C's, we're talking about culture, the one where you're talking about character. And the reason I find that to be interesting is because as an organization, SmartPro Financial, we have financial professionals, and a lot of times we find that it's easier to find that, not easier, it's better, and ultimately it's what's led to a lot of our growth as an organization, is to find people that are high on character rather than high on competence. And the reason that's an interesting look at it, and it's not to say one over the other in the sense of we don't want competent advisors. We want ultimately the very best and most competent financial professionals that we can have. But what we find is that in the environment we have, it's the temptation to say, I align with your values and your culture and your organization and your investment philosophy because I want something. And for us, being one of the largest Ramsey organizations in the United States, they want access to this group of people that want to work with them. And so
right.
they will hide their lack of character to be a part of an organization. And it's very difficult to train. I don't even know if it's possible to train character, if somebody is just going to be kind of a lousy person and they want that ultimate goal, right? Which is to be at the top of the organization, to be the taker that you mentioned, right? I want power. I want to be able to almost be a thief of an organization.
That's right.
Then that's where that ultimately can go, so
Absolutely.
we find getting somebody with strong character that believes in helping get people out of debt, that believes in investing for the long term, that believes that every family that comes to us, is special and should be treated with dignity and respect. Even if we're just starting a brand new Roth IRA or they have $5 million, we want everyone to feel like there's a place for them in our organization so that they can be helped and their families can be changed. And we build that hopefully long lasting, family wealth and change those family trees. That's the mission that we're on. And when people don't align with that because they say, I just want access to, a lead, or I want you to send me people to talk to, we're like, that's not what we want. And sometimes
Absolutely.
you have people a ton of competence, they lack character. And we'd rather
Yep.
build competency, and through education and growing our advisors, but we know that our financial professionals already have that character built in.
Yeah. If you
So
think
important
about
to
it,
the organization.
selfishness is a powerful motivator,
Mm-hmm.
but in the end, it always poisons the water. It
Yeah.
always destroys an organization. If you had the greatest basketball, we're in the midst of March Madness, right? You take the greatest basketball player on the planet, but they're selfish, they're going to destroy the team,
Yeah.
everyone around them. And so character, you can have great character and not have the competencies required for a job. You can do that.
Mm-hmm.
But no matter what your competencies, if you don't have character, you're going to destroy everything you touch. So character is the foundational issue, and then competency. And so, and you're right, it's not one over the other, it's one before the other.
Yeah.
Character before competency, not, over, because competency is really important.
Yep.
I have let people go who have unbelievable character, higher character than me, but their competencies didn't match.
Yeah.
And so there is that issue, but hey, those are also people who are going to go, oh, I get it. And you're
That's right.
right. That kind of deal. So it makes for a better less dysfunctional. There's no such thing as a totally dysfunctional organization, but a less
Yeah,
dysfunctional
that's right.
organization. Yeah.
Well, I want to kind of transition from talking about, an organization and leadership in an organization to something that I think a lot of people listening to this maybe at times are going to struggle with. And there's two questions I want to combine here, and one of them is, you know, speaking specifically to a Christian audience. How should Christians engage or disengage from culture? And then also going along with that, should Christians care where their money is invested?
Mm.
Assuming they're in mutual funds or ETFs, should they care what the underlying companies are? Are we held accountable for where the money is invested as Christians?
Yeah. By the way, both of those questions are really, really valid and really, really good. The first one, I'll take them in the order you gave them.
Mm-hmm.
So your first question was about engaging or disengaging from culture. And I have to tell you, you have to walk a little bit of a tightrope on this one. You have to be careful about declaring absolutes on this one, because there are lines that can be crossed and all that. But let me give you the principle upon which I try and find wisdom in that decision making. The average church in America, and since we're talking to Christians,
Mm-hmm.
you said it even in your question, a lot of Ramsey influenced people,
That's
and
right.
I know Dave and have had the chance to interview him and be in small group settings with him. Great guy, for real deal. Extreme. When he talks about generosity, he means it. But so we're talking to Christians. The average church has disengaged from culture. They love the comfort of the walls that they've put around themselves to keep the world out. And they love whatever size the church is. Average church in America is about 85, if you can believe it, 85
Wow.
people, just enough to support a pastor to take care of their needs
That's
and to
right.
keep everybody out. It's just crazy.
Yeah.
But so what they're doing is the average church has disengaged from culture, and the average, since churches are people, the average Christian has disengaged from culture. Yeah, they go to work. Yeah, they do this. Yeah, the kids go to school. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to not be touched by it, in their environment. The only problem is Jesus said that we were, as we follow him, going to become light in darkness. Well, if we put walls and ceilings around the light and don't allow for the door to swing both ways, for darkness to come in, those who don't yet follow Jesus, and for the light to go out, it's ridiculous. And so I actually believe Jesus has called us to be light in darkness, which is a principle of engaging the culture. In fact, I think too often the culture goes south more quickly and in more devastating of ways because of the disengagement of the light in that darkness. It's just true.
Mm-hmm.
And so I believe we should have a philosophy of engagement. Where that gets tense is you have to be careful, because there are a lot of people who say, oh, I'm going to engage our culture, so we're going to send our 5-year-old or our 8-year-old into these settings, these schools, and they're going to be light and darkness. No. Why do you think God gave parents to kids for the time of their early development years and growth? It wasn't so they could go out into darkness and be light. It was so that they can invest in them in such a way that these kids become people of character, people of light, who can withstand the harshness of culture when they get older. So we have to be careful about how we see it. I think as adults, we should be engaging culture. If we're called to be teachers, we shouldn't just teach in Christian settings necessarily. If we're called to be, leaders, we shouldn't just lead in Christian, settings, because engage the world. But be careful with the kids, right? And make sure that they're, but then you have to train them. When our kids were in elementary school, we sent them to Christian school. Then when they went into middle school and high school, we started releasing them into the public school thing. And our idea was this: while they're still under our influence, they need to start learning to swim against culture.
Mhm.
And bad decisions were made. It was difficult. We didn't do it perfectly. But my point is, engage culture, but be wise about it.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is, you asked about the investment thing. And I think it comes down to this as well. If all the people of light, or let's say Jesus followers, are the ones he's made good, none of us are good on our own. If all the good people withdraw from, the world of investment, who's going to control it and where's it going to go?
Yeah.
The same thing with government, the same thing with all these different things. And so I think we need to be careful about this black and white thing. I will only invest in Christian companies. Well, then you're sending 99% of the corporate world, the Wall Street world, the financial world, into darkness. You're just giving it over. Well, I don't think that's right either. But I do believe that we should never compromise significantly our values. So we should be careful. It's like if something's known to be absolutely anti-God, some business, anti-God is going anti-God, this kind of thing, maybe we need to start asking questions. And there's no perfect answer on this. The whole thing. My wife and I love Disney. Disney World. We grew up on it. We were there in 1971 when it opened in Orlando, those kind of things. It's like, and we took our kids a lot. We did all that different stuff. Well, now Disney's done some things that are pretty interesting, and a lot of Christians are going out.
Yeah.
And I get it.
Yeah.
But is that the best way? So I don't believe it's black and white, Rick.
Yeah.
And I know this when I go grocery shopping, wherever you go grocery shopping, the ownership of that grocery store that you're investing in to buy food probably isn't righteous.
Yeah.
The restaurants you go to, probably the ownership and all the people out there aren't totally righteous. The stores you go to, the Amazon, probably not righteous at the foundational level of its thing, and yet we invest a lot in it. So we have to be careful about, I'd never invest in anything that's not a Christian valued thing. Really? Where do you buy your food?
Yeah.
Where'd you buy your car? So I think the first thing is this is a really big deal. Admit the complexity. Don't try and pretend it's easy. Admit the complexity. Pray for wisdom. James 1:5, if we lack wisdom, it's almost it's almost a stand-up comedy passage. If we lack wisdom, let's ask God for wisdom and he'll give it to us without withholding. If we lack wisdom, really, if we lack wisdom, how stupid is that? And so because we lack wisdom, we should be praying to God about wisdom in this thing. Money and profit should never be more important in the end than what we value as followers of Jesus and people of the light. But at the same time, Jesus went into places of darkness. He was accused by the self-declared righteous as being evil and bad and a false prophet because he hung out with publicans and sinners, the worst of the worst, And so I think we have to engage culture. I think we have to be willing to do that. That means we're going to participate in some marketplace realities of that and some investments that we just have to make sure we're being wise.
That's right.
And not to make our profits more important than our values, to understand why we're doing it. And to admit its complexity, to admit we don't have all the answers, and then to keep learning and growing. And I'm doing that. I'm learning and growing.
So I think another part of engaging in culture in a way that I think is really important, for a lot of us, it's interesting because we help people eventually get to retirement. And I don't really know what that exactly means. And I know that sounds interesting because for a lot of people, their idea of retirement is I want to play golf and I want to, drink lemonade and that's it. And I think the reality is, and so
I don't think they want to drink. I don't think it's lemonade they want to drink, but I get the point.
Maybe not, right? But it's maybe more just to have choices to do what you want. And one of the things that we want to do is we want to get people out of debt. We want to get them to have an emergency fund, save money so they don't have to go back to debt. We want them to be in a position to where they own their home, right? They don't have mortgage payments in retirement, or when they decide, hey, I want to stop working the way I've been working, and we want to make sure that they have enough money saved that they can, as one of the quotes that Dave Ramsey says a lot, is they can live and give like no one else. So a big mission of us is we want people to have a spirit of generosity. That's a big part of retirement, is to be able to be now impactful with the life work you've been able to do. And having that spirit of generosity, I think, is incredibly important for the individual. I think it gives them purpose, and when that working time is done, I think that it's good for us as humans, for the human experience, to have generosity. But also as an organization, you can have generosity. And a lot of times, I think the world leaves that up to either the government, or it leaves it up to maybe the churches, right? The individual doesn't take on that responsibility of helping out people in their community for the most part, for the average person. Now, the church, your church just did a million meals, campaign where you guys have just fed all these families with what you've done as an organization. And that's a huge, a way to show generosity as an organization. The two questions here is, I want you to speak on generosity, if you would, for the individual, but also, is there a way, and we think about so many business leaders that are listening, people that own a business, is there a way an organization can be generous? Because a lot of times organizations will say, no, we pay salaries, and then people can individually do what they want with that, right? Or we don't want to be in, that's not our business. Our business is to make profit, and that's it.
Yep. And
is there another way?
Yeah. I love the question. It's an important question. Even the worst among us knows that the answer to that question is obvious. But I think we need to talk about it. And I actually hear three issues, and they all interrelate, that you brought out to those two questions: personal generosity, organizational generosity. And just before it, you talked about retirement and helping people get there. Mm-hmm. And I have to tell you, I'm in a different stage of my life than I've ever been. I mean, when you turn 65, that's the Bible doesn't say when you're 65, you retire.
Sure.
There were some mandates on some priest situations where, they had an age margin, but not for the rest of us. But I think people retire with the same character motivation that they work with. Mm-hmm. And I think there are a lot of people whose entire work life has been selfish. It's about me, my income, what I can get, and any organization that'll pay me what I want to get paid, I'll take from them, do that. And they retire the same way. It's selfish driven. And just, I was a pastor for 4 years when I was a very young man in Naples, Florida.
Okay.
Snowbird heaven.
Yep.
And it was so weird as a young guy. We were building this church, and the people who would come down would do nothing. They'd sit, watch, and enjoy the show, but they would never invest in volunteering, in ministry, or even in giving. It was crazy. And these were people who said, yeah, we've paid our dues. We've paid our dues. We've paid our dues. So their retirement was selfishly motivated. They were also miserable people to a great extent. But if you're driven in your career by unselfishness, by generosity, I'm not leading this organization just to benefit me. Yeah, there'll be residual of self-benefit, but that's not why I'm doing it. You'll tend to retire for the same reason. And I used to be totally against retirement, the idea of retirement. Retirement, come on. God didn't call us to retire. We're supposed to die with our boots on. But what I've realized as I've gotten older is retirement's not a ceasing of doing anything of value, or investing your gifts, or investing others. It's a changing of how you make that investment. And the truth is, as the leader of a very large organization, I know the work it takes. I know the demands it takes. I know the passion it takes. And there's going to come a time when I realize, as much as I love this church that I've been able to pastor so much, I am no longer the best choice to be the lead. And so now I have to make a decision. Do they want me to go? No, they won't want me to go. Will they beg me to stay? Yep, they'll beg me to stay. Will they tell me how great I am? Of course they will, and all that stuff. But will they keep paying me? They'll even offer me more.
Yeah.
But those aren't the reasons I'm there. The reasons I'm there is to be, leading that organization to its best version of itself under
That's
God's
right.
mission and values. And if I'm no longer the best equipped in the 5 C's, which I have to apply to me just as I do to other people, then I need to, not for my convenience, but for the good of the organization and good of the people I lead, start stepping aside and looking for other ways God wants me to invest my gifts in bigger or smaller ways, because it's not about me. Then it comes to the generosity thing. So the way we retire or don't retire is going to be driven by the same character that we have. And generosity is at the heart of that.
Yeah.
The leader that's sacrificing self to invest in their organization or their business or whatever, pastor with church, is the generous leader, has a heart of gratitude. They know they don't deserve the privileges they have in that leadership position, that it's not for them and their privilege. They're generously giving. They don't talk about generosity of time, talent, or treasure without being it themselves. A lot of government officials love talking about generosity as long as they're talking about other people's money.
Yeah.
Or other people's time. They don't do it. And that's why we're in the mess we're in so many ways. Same thing happens in corporations, businesses. So generosity is vital for the individual, because remember we talked about character before competence. If you don't have a generous spirit, I can know for a fact you're just going to be looking for ways to take when it's inconvenient for you. You're going to hurt the organization as a heart. And we don't know someone's heart, but we know reflections that indicate it. And financial giving is one of them. Someone who's not willing to give financially is a person who's hoarding for themselves, not trusting God as the provider, but trusting themselves as the hoarder. A limited pie person instead of infinite pie kind of a view of life. With God, there's always more where that came from. But hoarders say, there's only a limited amount. I'm going to keep as much of it for me as I can. What's that? Selfishness. And just so you know, the average person in the average church doesn't give. Yeah. I've pastored the church a very, very long time at every stage of the game. The average person who claims to love Jesus doesn't give. What does that say? They're taking from God, but they don't have a heart of generosity like God. It's tough. So personal generosity is essential to be a person of character. It's just essential. Yeah. So that's why I love Dave Ramsey again. He doesn't miss the generosity point. And in fact, he says that's kind of the point. Yeah. And then the organizational one, because organizations are people. And so how can an organization not be generous if it's driven and led by people of generosity? It can't. And so as I've grown more generous, and I haven't always been a generous person. I started out as a taker, dude. It's like, and then Christ transforms you into this. If you're really following Jesus, that part of you starts to transform. And, that's right. And as that started in me, and it's a journey, then it started in my leadership. How could I be transforming in this way and not wanting to lead the organization to do the same thing? So as a church, you mentioned the Million Meals thing. We recruited 5,000 volunteers. Wow. To come and invest. We did this in a matter of a month. Okay. From vision casting to event, about a month, maybe 5 weeks. We cast the vision of generosity to feed 3,000 children for an entire year, which is 1 million meals. And so it's just under 3,000. And so we recruited volunteers, got an organization, invested the money, didn't ask people who participated to give. We as a church organization said, God's blessed us. We're going to do this. It was about a $500,000 investment. Wow. And got the volunteers, did all the organizational generosity from time to talent and treasure. And in 3 days, packed these plus 1 million meals. And for the next year, 3,000 people that are impoverished and wouldn't have been eating otherwise will be eating. And these aren't people who will benefit our church. Yeah. These aren't people who are in our community. These aren't people who are that. But this will benefit God's kingdom. This will make God smile. this will then be a reflection of generosity in our hearts, which then leads to the full experience of the joy that Jesus can give us, because it's more blessed to give than to receive, as the scripture says. So generosity as an organization is huge. And we've done it. It's not just a one-time thing. It starts somewhere. But we decided that we were going to change 2 communities in Zambia. We're a church in Detroit, Michigan, and Ann Arbor. What's Zambia got to do with it?
Yeah.
But we had a heart for it. So we went out, and with millions and millions of dollars from our congregational people, we basically adopted close to, 3,000 kids in 2 communities so that we could reshape those two communities. And we're almost at the end of that. It's been a 15-year process. In the middle of it, we built 2 hospitals, one in each of those communities. And as a little church in Detroit, $1.5 million to that thing. When the Ukraine war started and people were having to go as refugees into Poland and Czechoslovakia and all these different things, we said, this is ridiculous. And so we, in a matter of a month, raised $750,000 to send over to churches on the border there so that they would have the resources to bring in these refugees in the name of Jesus Christ to do it. And it's like, it's flowing from the generosity of our lives, and it becomes the reality of the organizations that's led by and attended by people of generosity, at least those who have influence. And so look at organizations that aren't generous, and you're looking at organizations that aren't led by generous people. It's just a fact. And so it's very, very important, very important.
Well, I have one final question as we wrap this up. You mentioned your book. I have it here in front of me as well. So in your book, Change Your Church for Good, on page 210, you had a quote there that was highlighted, and it said, there's nothing more difficult to get people to embracing than change, right? So let me say that again. There's nothing more difficult to get people embracing than change. And so my question is, there's been a lot of change. We mentioned this change in environment, change of world we're in. There's always change in any organization, any if you're even a sole proprietor, just in anything that you're doing, there's always change, right? So even large organizations, middle, small, always change that we're going through. So the question is, do you find it easier to react to change that's thrust upon you from the environment? Hey, we have to do this, we have to change. Or do you find it to be easier to implement change over time? And the reason I ask it that way is because sometimes when you don't have to overthink something, you can react quickly. Maybe you make the right decision, but you're not having to overthink it, and you can implement and go. Other times, when you implement something, that should be better, but you also have opinions and influence and people, and you can be put adrift of maybe what it is you're changing. So there's some complexities to it, but what do you find to be easier, reacting to change or implementing change over time?
Yeah, great question. In fact, it's an essential question to ever be a great, quote unquote, great leader. And I need to start with a statement before I answer the question. The statement is this: change, for whatever reason, in any circumstance, is always difficult. It's hard, especially to change in the right way, in the right directions, So it's always difficult, but it's far easier as a leader to react to change than it is to see change that needs to happen out in the future for the organization to be successful out in the future. That's not mandated by the moment.
Yeah.
And so change that's happening to you, in your words, change that's coming at you and you have to react to, it's kind of like your back's against the wall, do or die. Yeah. You have to do something. You can't think now. The comfort zone doesn't work for you because there's not going to be a comfort zone. Yeah. Change is coming at you. You have to react. Now, that doesn't mean in an organization everybody will have unanimity about what you should do. It doesn't mean everybody will respect what you do. It doesn't mean everybody will collaborate well around it. But everybody, it's do or die. Here we go. We got to keep swimming. We got to keep breathing, that kind of deal. The only problem is reactive leadership, while important, it's a part of life. Reactive leadership never positions you best for the ultimate future. as an individual or an organization, because you're just reacting. It's like you're putting a tourniquet on, you're stopping the bleeding. You're calling the ambulance and going to the hospital, let's, triage this thing. It's a mass unit. But great leadership has to take an environment where positive things are already happening, good things are already happening, and see ahead which way is the world going, where's culture going, what's greater effectiveness look like in our organization, what kind of team members and investments are going to be needed to get there, what's the bus look like, and what are the seats on the bus going to look like to get us to that place we aren't right now. Right. Everything's going right now exactly like it needs to go for the organization we are. What do we have to become out there? The reason that's so difficult, first of all, it's difficult to see it. The truth is change is always happening, but it's very easy to miss it. And you have to study hard, work hard, engage hard to see it. The reason it's harder to change an organization or to change that's not happening to you, you're laying down the change, is because there's no external motivation. The people are going to go, we're fine, thank you very much. We like how things are being done. That's very much. We've been successful doing it this way. This is really, really good. But yeah, you'll stay just like that into death. The church that I inherited, I already talked about how it had been in 3 decades of decline. The average age was 60. They sent 2 generations out the door of the church. It was crazy. Here's their sayings, the 7 last words of the church. We've never done it that way here before. It's like, oh, yeah, okay. So that's why you're experiencing what you're experiencing, So they thought they were doing great, but I had to say, but you're not doing great. Jesus didn't call you to die for your man-made strategy. Jesus called you to die, to be light in a world of darkness, to proclaim his truth in the world, that kind of thing. And so this is why it's harder. You have to see it. You have to know who doesn't see it. You have to get primary influencers to see it with you. Then you have to get everybody who's an influencer, influencing in their spheres downward, and get everybody seeing it enough to where they're willing to sacrifice to get there. It's a lot rougher, but it's also a lot better for an organization. And then I will say this, when you create a culture committed to the dynamic of change, then your worst problem comes from people who start identifying that you're plateauing and you're not changing. That's a good thing. So change becomes easier. I believe large organizations can be as nimble as small organizations, as long as they create the processes, the communication, the commitment to change, because then change is a part of the culture, the value of that organization. But it's harder because external change, COVID's a good example. That was thrust upon us. Everybody knew, backs against the wall, we got to do something.
That's right.
There were lots of disagreements about what. But when you're a successful organization, but you can see that you could be 3 times as successful, but these things are blocking that, and you need to start changing that, no one else is going to feel that pressure. So it's the hard work of leading, communicating, clarifying, answering questions, and building a team that can create momentum forward with you.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic. As we kind of end here, we like to end on, a key takeaway. What is if there was one thing that you said, we haven't talked about, or maybe we have and you want to emphasize it, but what is it that if you're a leader or an individual listening to this, that you feel like something that can help them, whether it's growing an organization, whether it's growing as a person, what is something that's a key takeaway that can help that individual?
Yeah, it's a really important question. And I really mean this, and it goes back to the principles I lay out about how to lead and change culture and all that stuff. And I'm just going to say it straight up. You have to make sure that you're the right leader. You just really do. And the world's not forcing us to be the right leader. The world's not forcing us to be this thing. Leaders don't punch clocks generally. Leaders don't have, people watching when they show up, when they leave, who have accountability over them and all that. It has to be all self-generated. And you have to make sure you're the right leader. There are all kinds of words for it. 360-degree leadership, where you're not just leading outward around, but you're leading inward in. And I would just really encourage every single one of you who are in leadership to stop saying, Lord, change my business. Lord, change the world. Lord, change my staff. Lord, change these things. Lord, change this. Instead, start making your prayer, Lord, change me. Because out of the transformation he works in you, in becoming the right leader, calling, character, competency. Again, no one's going to force you to grow in your competencies. You have to do it yourself. Read, go to conferences, listen to people, stuff like this podcast that you, Rick, are offering. And then make sure that you understand chemistry and that you're fitting in that. And that if you don't, that you have the integrity to move on and join a place that does, and crave. Make sure you're hungry. If you don't wake up and feel the hunger to achieve, do it. It starts with you. And if you say, Lord, change me, Lord, give me wisdom, Lord, help me to be the right leader, then you'll start influencing the people closest around you to be that way. You'll start leading your organization to be that way. And I just think it all begins, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, the Bible says. Yep. Out of the abundance of the heart, the leader leads. So I would say just make sure you're the right person, the right leader for this moment where you are. And that would go a long way to making you a bigger impact.
Yep, that's great. Well, Brad, thank you so much for your time. How do our listeners interact with you more? How do they find you? How do they follow you? I know we mentioned your book, which I'll hold up here, and that you have, which is Change Your Church for Good. How else can our listeners continue to hear from you?
Yeah, I appreciate it. I do, of course, a lot of my stuff is fed out as the pastor of NorthRidge Church until God leads me to not be the lead pastor of this very large organization that is a full-time job. It probably won't change, but I have Instagram, just at Brad Powell. I have an X Twitter account, at Brad Powell. And then I have a Facebook page, Brad Powell Facebook page that allows people. And what I do is I sometimes devotional, sometimes personal, sometimes thoughts, but very often influenced by my leadership at NorthRidge Church, very often in response to something that's going on there. And I'm trying to develop now. I used to do a podcast. I don't do it anymore. I have a YouTube channel, but you won't find it. NorthRidge has a YouTube channel. You can kind of check that out. Go to the NorthRidge YouTube channel and you can check out talks and things that we do that way. But I'm looking for ways to start a more leadership-oriented podcast to help leaders to grow and those kind of things. And so and I have a website, bradpowellonline.com. It's fairly flat, two-dimensional, stagnant now, but Lord willing, there'll be a day when it's not. So, and as it relates to the book, it's the story of our church, story of transition. It can be related to any aspect, and you can probably get it pretty cheap on Amazon now. It's been out for quite a while. It's not the newest book in the world, but yeah.
Well, I got mine on Amazon, and it's there. So everyone go out and go look for that if you feel like that would be something that would be helpful for your organization or your church. Brad Powell, the lead pastor of NorthRidge Church, thank you so much.
Thanks, Rick. Really good time being with you. And thanks for what you're doing. Really proud of it.
Thank you.